I stood there in silence while my uncle declared he was bulldozing my warehouse on Monday, acting like he was scrubbing a stain off the family name. I actually smiled because I knew the city inspector would arrive just hours before the heavy machinery. My uncle had no idea that what he called an abandoned shack was actually hiding a secret powerful enough to flip the ownership of this entire block in just one morning. My name is Audrey Kerr, and in the eyes of the Kessler family dynasty, I was a glitch in their perfectly analog operating system. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany conference table, a piece of furniture that had been in my family for 3 generations, scratching at a phantom spot of varnish with my thumbnail. I was 33 years old, yet in this room, the air always felt thin, compressed by the weight of expectations I had failed to meet simply by being myself. To them, I was the woman who played with computers in a dark room, the granddaughter who took a prime piece of commercial real estate and turned it into a rusted eyesore. We were in the main boardroom of the Kessler Building in downtown Fairmont Harbor, Ohio. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was waking up to a gray, humid Monday morning. Inside, the atmosphere was less like a family breakfast and more like a criminal sentencing hearing where the verdict had been decided before the defendant even entered the room. My Uncle Dale sat at the head of the table. He was a large man who wore suits that cost more than my first car, yet he always looked uncomfortable in them, as if his ambition was slightly too big for his skin. He had called this emergency meeting at 7 in the morning, a power move designed to catch everyone off guard, specifically me. Around the table sat the board of the Kessler Trust, my Aunt Linda, my cousin Lena, and a few silent partners who always voted whichever way the wind of Dale's mood was blowing. "We cannot keep bleeding potential revenue. Audrey," Dale said, his voice booming off the paneled walls. He did not look at me. He looked at the heavy binder open in front of him. "The downtown revitalization project is pushing property values through the roof. Every square foot of pavement in Fairmont Harbor is gold right now. Gold. And what do we have sitting on the corner of 4th and Elm? A rust bucket." "It is a warehouse," I said calmly. My voice sounded small in the large room, but steady. "It is my warehouse. Grandmother left it to me specifically." "It is an abandoned warehouse," Aunt Linda corrected. Her lips pursed as she stirred her coffee with a tiny silver spoon. "Let's be honest, dear. It is a blight. The tenants in the main building are complaining about the view. It looks like a squat house. It brings down the prestige of the entire block." "It is not abandoned," I repeated, a phrase I had said so many times over the last 5 years that it felt like a prayer spoken to an empty room. "I operate my business from there." Dale let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, meant only to belittle. "Business, Audrey? Sitting in the dark with a laptop and stealing Wi-Fi is not a business. Real business is brick and mortar. Real business is high-end retail. Real business is parking." He slammed his hand on the table, making the china cups rattle. "That is what this town needs. Parking. I have 5 restaurants begging for lease renewals. And their #1 complaint is that their customers have nowhere to park. We have the solution right there. We bulldoze that heap of scrap metal you call an office, pave the lot, and we have 65 premium parking spots by next month. The revenue projection is right here." He slid a glossy sheet of paper down the table. It stopped just inches from my hand. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to look at the numbers to know they had already spent the money in their heads. "We are doing this for you, really," Cousin Lena chimed in. She was 2 years younger than me, but acted 10 years older, draped in pearls and smelling of expensive floral perfume. "It is embarrassing, Audrey. People ask what that building is, and we have to change the subject. Uncle Dale is offering to clean up your mess. You should be thanking him." I looked around the table. Their faces were a mixture of pity and annoyance. They saw a woman who wore hoodies to work, who didn't talk about stocks or golf, and who hoarded a piece of prime land for no discernible reason. They saw a failure. They had no idea that inside that rust bucket, the server racks were processing data for 3 regional hospital networks and a logistics firm that moved freight across the entire Midwest. They didn't know because they never asked. To them, If you couldn't see the product on a shelf, it didn't exist. I am not selling, I said, and I am not demolishing. Dale leaned forward, his face reddening slightly. The mask of the benevolent patriarch was slipping. This is not a debate, Audrey. This is a notification. The Kessler Trust holds the lien on the surrounding infrastructure. That building is a safety hazard. I have already spoken to the city. We are moving forward. You spoke to the city? I asked. This was the first time I felt a genuine spike of adrenaline. Not fear, but the sharp clarity of a chess player realizing their opponent has made a fatal error. Who did you speak to? People who understand progress. Dale waved his hand dismissively. We have the permits. The demolition crew is scheduled for this morning, 8 o'clock. Today? I asked. You are bulldozing my property in less than 1 hour? We are clearing a hazard, Dale corrected, his voice dropping to a growl. And don't worry about the cost. The trust will absorb the demolition fees. Consider it a final gift from the family. We will even cut you in on a percentage of the parking revenue, once you pay back the cleanup costs. He signaled to his assistant, who placed a large roll of blueprints on the table. Dale unrolled them with a flourish. It was a rendering of the new parking lot. It was sleek, paved, and lifeless. But my eyes didn't stay on the rendering. They drifted to the corner of the document, where the stamps and signatures were clustered. I stood up and leaned over the table, ignoring the look of distaste on Aunt Linda's face as my shadow fell over her. I traced the red ink on the bottom right corner. Preliminary approval. There was a signature there. It was a scrawl, illegible, hasty, but there was something missing. Who signed the demolition order? I asked. The room went quiet. The silence wasn't the respectful kind. It was the confused silence of people who weren't used to being questioned by the furniture. What does it matter? Lena asked, rolling her eyes. It is signed. It is legal. It matters, I said, looking directly at Dale. Because a demolition order requires a structural safety inspection by a certified city engineer. It requires a hazardous materials survey. My warehouse was built in 1950. It would be flagged for asbestos and lead paint automatically. No inspector would sign off on a teardown without a site walk. Dale shifted in his chair. He adjusted his tie, a nervous tic I remembered from when grandfather used to grill him about the books. We have a consultant. He handled the paperwork. It is all expedited. Standard procedure for priority development zones. Expedited, I repeated. So, no inspector came inside? Nobody needs to go inside to know it is a wreck. Audrey, Dale snapped. Stop trying to find technicalities. It is done. The trucks are already en route. By lunch, that eyesore will be rubble, and we can finally move this family forward. I looked closer at the stamp. Approved pending site verification. The text was tiny, almost microscopic, buried under the bold red approved stamp that someone, likely Dale's consultant, had slapped over it. Dale had not gotten a real permit. He had bought a preliminary review and was gambling that he could knock the building down fast enough that the city wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care once the dust settled. He was counting on the fact that it was just an abandoned warehouse owned by his silent, pushover niece. He thought he was erasing a mistake. I realized then that they really didn't know me. They didn't know that the abandoned building had security cameras with facial recognition that had already logged every car Dale had driven past the property in the last month. They didn't know that the mess inside was worth more than this entire conference room. And they certainly didn't know about the relationship I had built with the one man in City Hall who hated shortcuts more than he hated paperwork. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stop. I slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. Who are you calling? Aunt Linda asked sharply. Audrey, put the phone away. We are not finished. I am not calling anyone, I said. I unlocked the screen. I opened my secure messaging app. I scrolled to a contact simply labeled A.S. I typed one sentence. Please come early. They intend to demolish. I hit send. I watched the small checkmark turn solid, indicating the message had been delivered. Audrey, Dale shouted, losing his patience entirely. Are you listening to me? This is happening. You can either get on board and accept the parking revenue, or you can stand in the debris and get nothing. Those are your choices. I looked up from my phone. I looked at Dale, red-faced and sweating in the climate-controlled room. I looked at Lena, smirking behind her hand. I looked at the blueprints that detailed the destruction of my life's work. I understand your position, Uncle Dale, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used when I found a critical error in a line of code, detached, clinical, and ready to execute the fix. I really do. I picked up my bag. Where are you going? Lena asked. The trucks are coming. I am going to the warehouse, I said. If you are going to destroy it, I should be there to watch. Good, Dale said, leaning back, thinking he had won, thinking my resignation was surrender. Get any personal items out. You have 45 minutes. That should be plenty of time, I said. I turned and walked toward the double doors. I could feel their eyes on my back. They were exchanging looks of triumph. They were probably already mentally spending the money from the parking meters. They thought they had just crushed the weak link in the family chain. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The heavy wood clicked shut behind me, muffling the sound of their self-congratulatory chatter. I walked down the corridor to the elevator, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I checked my watch. 7:28 in the morning. Jonas Sutter, the chief city inspector, was a man of rigorous habits. He started his rounds at 8, but I knew for a fact he was already in his government-issued sedan, sipping black coffee, likely less than 10 blocks away. He had told me once that the only thing he loved more than enforcing building codes was catching a developer trying to bypass them. My uncle thought he was playing a game of real estate. He didn't realize he had just started a game of federal compliance, and he had made the first move against a woman who controlled the board. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. I caught my reflection in the polished brass of the control panel. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like someone who had just set a timer on a bomb and was walking away before the blast. I smiled, just a little. Let them bring the bulldozers. Let them bring the noise. The louder they were, the harder it would be for them to explain themselves when the music stopped. The drive from the pristine glass and steel Kessler building to the edge of the warehouse district took exactly 12 minutes. I drove my 6-year-old sedan, a car that my cousin Lena had once described as a vehicle for a high school librarian, and parked around the back of the lot. I stood before the structure that was the source of so much familial contention. To the untrained eye, specifically the eyes of my Uncle Dale and Aunt Linda, the building was a carcass. It was a squat, rectangular box wrapped in corrugated metal that had rusted to the color of dried blood. The sign above the loading dock was faded to illegibility, a ghost of a logistics company that had gone bankrupt in the late 1990s. Weeds grew tall and jagged through the cracks in the asphalt, and the chain-link fence leaned inward as if it were tired of standing up. It looked abandoned. It looked worthless. It looked exactly the way I wanted it to look. The art of camouflage is not about being invisible. It is about being uninteresting. I walked up to the side personnel door. It was covered in graffiti that I had never bothered to scrub off. A generic tag in neon orange spray paint obscured the heavy steel reinforcement I had installed behind the frame. There was no visible keypad, no sleek biometric scanner glowing in the gloom. I reached under the lip of the rusted rain gutter, tripped a magnetic sensor with a fob on my keychain, and waited for the dull, heavy thud of the internal deadbolts retracting. The moment I stepped inside and pulled the door shut, the world changed. The smell of wet concrete and city smog vanished, replaced by the crisp, sterile scent of ionized air and ozone. The humidity dropped instantly. The temperature was a constant 68 degrees, maintained by an industrial HVAC system that cost more than my Uncle Dale's entire fleet of luxury SUVs. I walked through the airlock, a small vestibule designed to keep dust out, and entered the main floor. This was not a warehouse. This was a cathedral of data. The floor was raised 2 feet off the original concrete slab, covered in anti-static tiles that muffled my footsteps. Rows of black server cabinets stretched away into the dim blue light, standing like monoliths in the darkness. They hummed with a low, unified vibration that I felt in my teeth, a sound that meant life. Cables ran in disciplined bundles overhead, color-coded and zip-tied with obsessive precision. Amber and green status lights blinked in a rhythmic dance, processing transactions, routing logistics data, and hosting backups for companies that could not afford a single second of downtime. This was Northbridge Compute Cooperative. I walked down the center aisle, running my hand lightly along the cool metal of a server rack. I remembered the day Grandmother Marlene gave me the deed. It was 6 months before she died. She was sitting in her sunroom, looking small in her oversized floral armchair, holding a folder that smelled of lavender and old paper. The family had already started circling her assets like sharks sensing blood in the water. Dale wanted the commercial strips. Linda wanted the vacation homes. They were dividing her life into portfolio percentages. Marlene had called me over and pressed the folder into my hands. "Audrey," she had said, her voice raspy but sharp, "they do not understand you. They think because you are quiet. You are weak. They think because you like machines better than cocktail parties. You are broken." "I know, Grandma," I had replied. "This property is not part of the Kessler Trust," she told me, tapping the folder with a manicured fingernail. "It is a separate deed. I bought it years ago under my maiden name to store antiques. It is yours. Do not put it in the family pot. Keep it. Build whatever it is you build. Just keep it yours." When the will was read, Dale had laughed. "Ideally suited for Audrey," he had joked. "A dusty old box for our dusty old girl." I never corrected him. I never told them that I had used my inheritance to gut the interior, reinforce the foundation, and install fiber optic lines thick enough to run a small city. I tried to explain it once, at a Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago. I had just signed my first major contract with a regional logistics firm. I was proud. I started to talk about data redundancy and uptime guarantees. Aunt Linda had patted my hand and smiled that pitying smile. "That is nice, sweetie. It is good you have your little computer games to keep you busy. Maybe one day you can help Dale fix the printer at the office." That was the moment I stopped talking. I realized that their ignorance was my shield. If they thought I was playing games in a garage, they would never look closer. I reached the central monitoring station, a glass-walled enclosure in the middle of the floor. Inside, Marcus, my lead technician, was staring at a wall of monitors. He was a 24-year-old genius with purple hair and a sleeve of tattoos, wearing a headset and spinning a pen between his fingers. He looked up as I entered, pulling off his headset. "Morning, boss," Marcus said. "You're early. System integrity is green across the board. The hospital network migration finished at 3 a.m. smoothly." "Good work, Marcus," I said. "We might have visitors soon." He raised an eyebrow. "Clients?" "Family," I said, "and a bulldozer." Marcus stopped spinning his pen. "Excuse me?" "My uncle is under the impression that this building is empty and that he is tearing it down in roughly 20 minutes. I explained calmly. "I need you to verify the off-site backups are current, just in case things get physical before the legal cavalry arrives." "You are kidding," Marcus said, standing up. "Audrey, we have the primary database for the County Water Authority running on Rack 4. If power cuts abruptly, we are talking about corruption risks." "I know," I said. "Keep the generators on standby. If the main line is cut, we have 48 hours of fuel, but I do not intend to let them get that far." I turned away from the station and looked toward the back of the facility. There, in the shadows past the last row of active servers, stood a single door. It was heavy steel, painted a dull gray to blend in with the walls. Unlike the front entrance, this door had a biometric scanner and a mechanical keypad. There was no handle, only a flush panel. This was room 4B. Even Marcus, who had root access to almost every system in the building, did not have the code to room 4B. The technicians joked about it. They had betting pools on what was inside. Some thought I was mining cryptocurrency. Others thought I was storing illegal content. One guy was convinced I was keeping a frozen alien body. The truth was far more dangerous than aliens. Inside that room was a dedicated, air-gapped server cluster hosting the private archives of a client who paid me 5 times the market rate for absolute discretion. It was not illegal data, but it was explosive. It was leverage. And the existence of that room was the reason why Northbridge wasn't just a business. It was a vault. If Dale's bulldozer knocked down that wall, he wouldn't just be destroying property, he would be exposing secrets that could topple city council members and bankrupt developers. The irony was perfect. Dale wanted to build a parking lot for real businesses, oblivious to the fact that the most significant business transaction in the state was happening quietly, invisibly, right under the roof he called a blight. I checked my watch. 7:45. I could hear the rumble of heavy engines outside. The vibration was different from the servers. It was a chaotic, guttural roar. The demolition crew had arrived. I walked over to the security console and pulled up the external camera feeds. On the screen, I saw a large yellow bulldozer rolling off a flatbed truck. Men in hard hats were setting up orange cones on the sidewalk. And there, standing by his black SUV, was Uncle Dale. He was pointing at my building, gesturing broadly to the foreman. He looked commanding. He looked powerful. Then I saw another car pull up, a modest gray city sedan. A man in a beige trench coat stepped out. He didn't look commanding. He looked tired. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. Jonah Sutter had arrived. I turned to Marcus. "Stay in the booth. Lock the door. Do not come out unless I tell you." "Audrey, are you sure?" Marcus asked, looking at the screen. "That looks like a big machine." "It is just noise, Marcus," I said, smoothing the front of my hoodie. "Just noise." I walked toward the exit. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I had the deed in my bag, the safety protocols in my head, and the ghost of Grandmother Marlene at my side. My family thought I was the one who needed saving. They thought I was the eccentric niece hiding in a ruin. They were about to learn that the ruin was a fortress, and the eccentric niece was the commander. I pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped out into the morning light to meet the war they had brought to my doorstep. The morning air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and the metallic tang of impending violence. It was 7:15 in the morning on a Monday, and the street outside my warehouse had been transformed into a construction zone. An excavator, painted a bright, aggressive yellow, sat idling on the cracked pavement of the lot. Its engine produced a low, rhythmic growl that vibrated in the soles of my shoes. The bucket, a massive steel jaw capable of tearing through brick and timber like wet paper, hovered just a few feet above the ground, twitching occasionally as the operator adjusted the hydraulics. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands buried deep in the pockets of my hoodie. I watched the scene with a detachment that felt almost out of body. Uncle Dale was orchestrating the spectacle from the center of the makeshift perimeter. He was wearing a hard hat that looked pristine and ridiculous atop his expensive suit. He was shouting instructions to a foreman who looked like he just wanted to get the job done and go get breakfast. "Widen the perimeter," Dale yelled, waving his arms. "I do not want debris hitting the street. We need this cleared by noon. I want a flat lot by the time the lunch rush hits." Behind him, standing safely near the parked cars, were the spectators. Aunt Linda, Cousin Lena, and even my cousin Ethan had shown up. They stood in a loose semicircle, holding travel coffee mugs, chatting casually. It looked like a tailgate party. They were not here to witness a demolition. They were here to watch a public sanitation. To them, my warehouse was a blemish on the Kessler legacy, and today was the day they scrubbed it clean. Lena pointed at the rusted sign above the loading dock and laughed at something Ethan said. They looked at me, then looked away quickly, their eyes sliding off me as if I were part of the debris that was about to be hauled away. I checked my watch. 7:20. The foreman walked over to the excavator and signaled the driver. The engine revved higher, a plume of black smoke coughing into the gray sky. The noise was deafening. It was a sound designed to intimidate, to announce that power had arrived. I stepped off the curb. I walked past the orange safety cones. I walked past the caution tape that was fluttering in the wind. I walked straight toward the excavator. "Hey," the foreman shouted, stepping in front of me. "Lady, you cannot be here. This is a hard hat zone." "It is my property," I said, my voice raised just enough to cut through the mechanical roar. Dale turned around, his face flushed with a mixture of annoyance and triumph when he saw me. He marched over, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Audrey, go home," Dale said, leaning in close so I could smell his cologne mixed with the diesel fumes. "Do not make a scene. It is over. The check for the scrap value will be in the mail." "I am not here to make a scene, Uncle Dale," I said, holding my ground. "I am here to ensure you follow the law." Dale laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "The law? I have the permit right here." He tapped the breast pocket of his jacket. "Everything is signed, sealed, and paid for. Now move, or I will have security escort you off the site for your own safety." "We are waiting for the city inspector," I said. Dale stopped laughing. He stared at me with genuine confusion, which quickly curdled into pity. "The inspector? Audrey, look at this place. Look at the rust. Look at the weeds. No city inspector is going to waste his morning coming down here to save a tear down. They signed off on the paperwork because they want this eyesore gone as much as I do." "Nevertheless," I said, "we wait." "We are not waiting for anyone," Dale snapped. He turned to the foreman. "Start it up. Knock the front wall down first." The foreman looked at me, then at Dale. He hesitated. "Sir, if she is the owner—" "I am the executor of the family trust that holds the lien on the land," Dale shouted, his patience evaporating. "I am giving you a direct order. Demolish it." The foreman shrugged and raised his hand to signal the driver. The excavator tracks ground against the asphalt. The machine lurched forward. The steel bucket rose high into the air, blocking out the sun, poised to strike the corrugated metal roof. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just looked down the street. A gray sedan turned the corner. It was moving fast, faster than a city vehicle usually moved. It did not slow down for the dip in the intersection. It swerved around the parked cars and screeched to a halt right in front of the orange cones, blocking the path of the construction truck. The time was exactly 7:28. The driver's door flew open. Jonah Sutter stepped out. He did not look like a hero. He looked like a man who had not slept well. His tie was slightly crooked, and he was holding a thick clipboard. He slammed the car door shut with a force that made Aunt Linda jump. Jonah marched past the cones, ignoring the foreman, ignoring the massive machine that was looming over us. He walked straight up to Dale. "Turn that engine off," Jonah said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute heavy weight of municipal authority. Dale blinked. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "Jonah Sutter, Chief City Inspector for District 4, Jonah said. He flashed a badge that hung on a lanyard around his neck. "I said, turn the engine off. Now." Dale bristled. He hated being told what to do, especially by men in cheap suits. "We have a permit. It was approved last week. I have the consultant's report right here." "I know what you have," Jonah said, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the warehouse, then at the excavator, and finally at me. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "And I know what you do not have. You do not have a pre-demolition hazardous materials clearance, and you do not have a structural disconnect verification from the power company." "It is an abandoned shed," Dale shouted, gesturing wildly at the building. "There is no power to disconnect. It is dead space." "If it is abandoned," Jonah said, turning to face the building, "then you will have no problem letting me conduct the mandatory walkthrough before you strike the first blow. Standard Procedure Code 104. "We are on a schedule," Dale argued, stepping between Jonah and the door. "This is obstruction. I will call the mayor. I will call your supervisor." "Call the Pope for all I care," Jonah said. "But that bucket does not touch that metal until I see the inside." Dale looked at the foreman, who had wisely signaled the driver to kill the engine. The silence that rushed back into the street was sudden and ringing. The family members were no longer chatting. They were watching, sensing that the script had gone off the rails. Fine, Dale spat. Go inside. You will see a lot of dust, some rats, and maybe a pile of garbage. Just make it quick. He turned to me, his hand held out expectantly. Give him the keys. Audrey, let's get this farce over with. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, heavy brass keyring. It looked ordinary. It gave no hint of the digital encryption fob attached to it. I handed the keys to Jonah. Be careful, I said softly. The door is heavier than it looks. Jonah took the keys. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the question in his eyes. He had trusted my text message, but he still expected to walk into a semi-functional storage unit. He had no idea what was actually waiting for him. Stay here, Jonah ordered. He walked to the side door. The graffiti-covered steel looked pathetic next to his polished shoes. He inserted the key. He paused as the magnetic lock disengaged with a solid, mechanical thunk that sounded nothing like a rusted latch opening. Dale rolled his eyes and checked his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. Tick-tock. Inspector, we are burning daylight. Jonah pulled the door open. He stepped into the darkness of the airlock. The door hissed shut behind him on its pneumatic closer. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. The street was silent. The only sound was the wind rattling the caution tape. Aunt Linda shifted her weight, looking uncomfortable. Cousin Ethan was frowning, staring at the door as if he had heard something strange. 3 seconds. I counted my heartbeats. I knew exactly what Jonah was seeing right now. I knew the moment the motion sensors triggered the aisle lights. I knew the moment the wave of cold, conditioned air hit his face. I knew the moment he saw the rows of blinking lights stretching back into the dark, the hum of $10 million worth of hardware singing its electric song. The door flew open. Jonas Sutter stumbled out as if he had been pushed. He was not looking at his clipboard anymore. He was looking at the building with wide, shocked eyes. He looked at the walls, really looking at them this time, seeing the ventilation ports I had disguised as rusted vents, seeing the reinforced conduit running into the ground. He turned to face us. His face was pale. Dismantle the perimeter, Jonah said. His voice was shaking slightly, but it was louder this time. Pack up the gear. Send the trucks away. What? Dale stepped forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Are you insane? I told you it is just a... Dismantle it, Jonah roared, losing his professional cool completely. He pointed a trembling finger at the excavator driver. If that machine moves 1 inch closer to this building, I will have you arrested for criminal negligence. On what grounds? Dale screamed. It is my property. Jonah turned on Dale. The inspector looked terrified. Not of Dale, but of what had almost happened. That is not a warehouse, Jonah said, breathless. That is a Tier 3 data center. There is a high-voltage industrial power feed running under that floor that could blow this entire block off the map if you pierced it. There are active server banks in there. Jonah pulled out his phone. His fingers were fumbling as he dialed. I am declaring this an emergency site preservation, Jonah said, holding the phone to his ear. He looked at Dale with a mixture of disbelief and fury. I am calling the station, and then I am calling the city attorney, because you just tried to bulldoze critical infrastructure without a permit. Dale froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. He looked at the building, then he looked at me. I stood exactly where I had been standing the whole time. My hands were still in my pockets. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched him realize that the garbage he wanted to throw away was the only thing holding up the sky. It is a criminal offense, Jonah said into the phone. His eyes locked on Dale. Yes, get a squad car down here, now. The silence that followed Jonah's phone call was heavy. The kind of silence that usually precedes a sentencing. The street, which moments ago had been filled with the roar of the excavator and the confident banter of my relatives, now felt like a vacuum. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren, approaching fast, growing louder with every heartbeat. Jonah stepped back from the curb, putting distance between himself and my uncle, as if Dale were contagious. He looked at the building again, shaking his head. then turned his gaze to the foreman of the demolition crew. "Kill the main power to the rig," Jonah ordered. "Disconnect the battery. If that bucket drops even an inch due to a hydraulic failure and cracks that foundation, we are talking about a cascade failure of a secured network. Do you understand me?" The foreman, a burly man who had looked bored 5 minutes ago, was now pale. He scrambled up the side of the machine himself to yank the kill switch. "What is going on?" Dale demanded, his voice cracking. The bluster was still there, but the foundation was shaking. "You are acting like I am bombing a hospital. It is a shed. For God's sake, it has some computers in it. So what? We can move them." Jonah turned on him with a look of absolute incredulity. "Some computers?" Jonah repeated. He gestured sharply toward the unassuming metal wall of my warehouse. "Mr. Kessler, I just walked into a facility that has better climate control than the City Hall archives. I saw biometric access points. I saw a halon gas fire suppression system piped into the ceiling. Nobody installs $100,000 worth of gas piping to protect cardboard boxes and old furniture." He took a step closer to Dale, invading his personal space with the weight of municipal code. "That is not storage. That is a professional infrastructure facility. It is a data center. Do you have any idea what the liability is if you cut power to a live server farm without a shutdown protocol? We are not talking about a civil suit for property damage. We are talking about criminal negligence." Dale wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip. He looked around at the family. Aunt Linda was clutching her purse with white knuckles. Cousin Lena had stopped checking her phone. They were beginning to realize that the narrative of the crazy niece was collapsing in real time. "I manage this block," Dale said. Trying to regain his footing, he puffed out his chest. "The Kessler Trust owns the land. I am the executor. I have the right to improve the assets. If Audrey is running a hobby project in there without permission, that is a violation of her lease." "Management is not ownership," Jonah cut him off. His voice was cold, sharp, and precise. "And tenancy laws in this state are very clear. You cannot evict a commercial tenant by knocking the building down on top of their head. That is called reckless endangerment." Jonah held out his hand. "I want to see the deed. I want to see the eviction notice served to the tenant. I want to see the structural engineering report that declared this building condemned. If you do not have them, I am sealing this site as a crime scene before the police even get out of their cars." Dale opened his mouth, but he had nothing. He looked at his assistant, who was frantically scrolling through a tablet, looking for documents that did not exist. We have a general management agreement," Dale stammered. "It covers all structures on the parcel. We didn't need a specific deed because it is all family property." "That is incorrect," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the hush of the street, it sounded like a gunshot. I stepped forward. I unzipped my backpack, which I'd been holding casually over one shoulder. I pulled out a thick, blue legal folder. It was organized with colored tabs. I had prepared this folder 3 years ago, updating it every January, waiting for this exact day. "Inspector Sutter," I said, handing him the file. Jonah took it, he opened it, and I watched his eyes scan the first page. "Certificate of title," Jonah read aloud. "Property transferred from Marlene Kessler to Audrey Kerr, dated October 12th, 2015, parcel ID 402B. It is separated from the main trust holdings." He flipped the page. "Business license," he continued. "Northbridge Compute Cooperative. Sole proprietor, Audrey Kerr. Zoning variance for light industrial and data processing. Approved 2016. He flipped another page. "Commercial liability insurance. Utility contracts in the name of the business, not the trust." Jonah closed the folder with a snap. He looked at Dale. The look was not one of anger anymore. It was the look a judge gives a defendant who has just confessed without realizing it. "Mr. Kessler," Jonah said, "you just ordered the demolition of a private commercial property that you do not own, occupied by a licensed business that you do not manage. You attempted to destroy the assets of a separate legal entity." I didn't know," Dale sputtered. He looked at me. his eyes wide with betrayal. "She never told us. She let us think it was empty. This is entrapment." "You never asked," Jonah said. "You assumed, and in my line of work, assumption is the mother of all workplace accidents." Then Jonah dropped the hammer. "If that excavator had dropped its bucket," Jonah said, lowering his voice to a terrifying whisper, "and if it had damaged the cooling integrity of those units, causing hardware failure for whatever clients she has in there, the damages would likely exceed the value of your entire parking lot project, and since you ordered the operator to bypass safety checks, the insurance would not cover you. It would be personal liability. And since you falsified the permit application by claiming the building was vacant..." Jonah let the sentence hang in the air. "That is fraud. That is a felony." The word felony seemed to physically hit Aunt Linda. She let out a small gasp and took a step back, distancing herself from her brother. But the final nail in the coffin didn't come from Jonah. It came from the foreman. The man had climbed down from his machine. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag, and he was looking at Dale with distinct hostility. He had heard the word felony, too. "Hold on," the foreman said. His voice was rough gravel. "You told me the permits were cleared. You told me you had a guy at the city who was handling the paperwork." Jonah spun around. "What guy?" The foreman pointed a thick finger at Dale. "Him. He said he had a consultant. He said we didn't need to wait for the city tags because the consultant had power of attorney for the district. He said he would take full responsibility if anyone asked questions." The foreman looked at Jonah. "I got the work order on text message. Inspector, I can show you. He offered a 20% bonus if we started before 8 a.m. He said he wanted it on the ground before the office crowd showed up." A bonus for bypassing safety protocols. A deliberate attempt to destroy evidence before it could be examined. The police cruiser turned the corner, lights flashing, but no siren. It pulled up behind Jonah's sedan. 2 officers stepped out, adjusting their belts. Dale looked at the police. He looked at the foreman who had just sold him out. He looked at his sister and niece, who were looking at the ground. Finally, he looked at me. For 30 years, I had seen my uncle look at me with many things. Disappointment, dismissal, mockery, indifference. I was the girl who didn't fit in. The girl who wasn't sharp enough for the cutthroat world of real estate. But now, for the first time, he looked at me with fear. He realized that while he was playing checkers, moving pieces around a board he thought he owned, I had been playing a completely different game. I hadn't just protected my building, I had let him walk into a trap of his own making. I had let him scream his orders and sign his fake permits, knowing exactly where the line of legality was and waiting for him to cross it. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of joy. I felt a cold, heavy sadness. "Uncle Dale," I said softly. He flinched. "You didn't just underestimate me," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "You didn't just try to bully me because you thought I was weak. You risked your own freedom for a parking space." I looked him in the eye. "You are not a businessman," I said. "You are a gambler, and you just bet the house on a bluff." One of the officers walked up to Jonah. "Inspector Sutter, you called for a site freeze?" "I did," Jonah said, handing the officer the blue folder I had given him. "We have an attempted illegal demolition, potential fraud regarding municipal permits, and we need to take statements from everyone here. Nobody leaves the scene." "Nobody?" Aunt Linda squeaked. "But I have a brunch at the club." "Nobody," the officer said firmly. I watched as the reality settled over them. They weren't the Kesslers, the royalty of Fairmont Harbor anymore. They were suspects standing on a sidewalk, waiting to be questioned about why they tried to destroy something they didn't understand. I turned back to my warehouse. The graffiti on the door seemed to wink at me. The secrets inside were safe. The servers were humming, and for the first time in my life, the family was going to have to wait outside while I went back to work. The police officers eventually left, but not before issuing a citation that I knew would cost the Kessler Trust a significant amount of money in fines and legal fees. The excavator was loaded back onto the flatbed truck. its yellow paint looking less intimidating and more ridiculous as it retreated down the street. The crowd of onlookers dispersed, whispering about the drama they had just witnessed. We did not go our separate ways. Instead, Uncle Dale insisted we return to the conference room. He called it a debriefing, but I knew what it really was. It was damage control. The walk back to the elevator was silent. The dynamic had shifted so violently that the air felt pressurized. An hour ago, I had been the family disappointment, the woman who needed to be managed and cleaned up. Now, I was a liability. I was a dangerous variable that had just demonstrated the ability to call down thunder from the city government. We sat in the same seats as before. My coffee cup was still there, cold and untouched. Dale sat at the head of the table, but he seemed smaller. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, and he was rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away the word felony. "Well," Dale said, exhaling a long breath. He looked around the table, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That was intense. I think we can all agree that things got a little heated down there." "Heated?" I repeated. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You tried to bulldoze my livelihood. Uncle Dale, that is not heat. That is destruction." "It was a misunderstanding. Audrey," Aunt Linda chimed in quickly. Her voice had changed pitch. It was higher, softer, the voice she used when she was trying to return a dress she had already worn. "We honestly thought the building was empty. We thought we were doing you a favor. You have to understand how it looked from our perspective." "From your perspective," I said, "it looked like I was weak. So you decided to take what was mine." "Oh, stop it," Cousin Lena said. She reached across the table and placed her hand on my arm. Her palm was clammy. "We are family. Nobody was trying to steal anything. We didn't know." She looked at me with wide, imploring eyes. "Why didn't you tell us? Audrey, why did you let us think you were just scraping by? If we had known you were running a real company, a high-tech company, we would have celebrated you. We would have been so proud." I looked at her hand on my arm until she pulled it away. "You never asked," I said. "In 5 years, Lena, you have never asked me a single question about my day. You asked me to fix your laptop twice. You asked me if I could Photoshop 10 pounds off your engagement photos, but you never asked what I actually do." "We assumed you were private," Lena said, pouting slightly. "You are always so secretive." "I am not secretive," I replied. "I am observant, and I observe that in this family, value is determined by volume. If you aren't loud, you don't exist, so I stayed quiet." Dale cleared his throat, regaining some of his composure. He clasped his hands on the table, shifting into his boardroom persona. The panic from the street was being paved over with corporate slickness. Okay, Dale said. "Let us put the past in the past. We made assumptions. You held back information. Mistakes were made on both sides." I almost laughed at the audacity of the both sides argument, but I stayed silent. I wanted to see where he was going. "The important thing is that we now know the truth," Dale continued. "North Bridge, that is a strong name, and hearing the inspector talk about Tier 3 infrastructure, that is impressive. Audrey, truly, it shows that you have that Kessler business instinct after all." He smiled at me. It was the first time in my life he had looked at me with anything resembling respect, but underneath the respect was something else: greed. "Since the business is operating on family land," Dale said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "we should discuss how to integrate it into the wider portfolio. The parking lot idea is dead, obviously, but a tech hub, a digital fortress in the heart of the district, we can market that. We can put the Kessler name on the signage. We can bring you into the fold properly." He was doing it again. He was trying to swallow me. He couldn't destroy the warehouse, so now he wanted to claim it. He wanted to take my success and paint it with the family brush so he could take credit for it at the country club. "The warehouse is not family land," I said. "As I showed Inspector Sutter, the deed is in my name, solely." "Technically, yes," Dale waved his hand dismissively. "But it is part of the original estate. Grandmother Marlene meant for us to all rise together, If you are generating significant revenue, and judging by that equipment, you are, then we need to look at the trust structure. There are expenses for the common areas, security for the block, street maintenance. It is only fair that Northbridge contributes its share to the family pot. He wasn't calling me the IT girl anymore. He was calling me Audrey. He was using the name of my company. He was treating me like an adult, but only because he smelled money. I pay my own taxes, I said. I pay for my own security, and I pay my own maintenance. The only thing the trust has ever given me is a demolition order. Audrey, be reasonable, Aunt Linda said, sipping her water. Dale is just saying that we are stronger together. You don't want to be out there all alone, do you? With the city breathing down your neck? Dale has connections. He can smooth things over with the zoning board. He can help you. Help me? I asked. He is the one who called the zoning board on me. That was before, Dale said. Now we are on the same team. Look, I am willing to forget the cost of the crew I hired today. I will eat that loss. In exchange, I want to see your financials, not to take anything, he added quickly, seeing my expression. Just to advise, to see where we can optimize, to see how the Kessler Trust can support your growth. I looked around the table. They were all nodding. They had instantly rewritten history in their minds. They weren't the villains who tried to crush me. They were the benevolent mentors who had just discovered a diamond in the rough and were graciously offering to polish it. It was sickening. It was also exactly what I expected. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the polished wood toward Dale. I do not need your advice, Uncle Dale, I said, and I do not need your protection. What I need is your signature. Dale looked down at the paper. What is this? It is a formal acknowledgement of property boundaries and a non-interference agreement, I said. It states that the Kessler Trust recognizes the independence of Parcel 402B. It states that you will cease all attempts to alter, access, or develop my land, and it states that any future construction on the adjacent lots must be cleared by my engineers to ensure no vibration damage to my servers. Dale's eyes narrowed. You want me to sign a restraining order against my own family? I want you to sign a contract, I corrected. Business to business. You said you wanted to treat me like a real business owner. This is how real business owners operate. We put things in writing. This is ridiculous, Lena scoffed. We are having lunch next week for Mom's birthday. Are you going to bring a lawyer to that, too? If the topic of my warehouse comes up, I said, yes. Dale picked up the paper. He read it slowly. I watched his eyes track the lines. I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. He was cornered. If he refused to sign, he was admitting he still intended to mess with my property. If he signed, he was legally walling himself off from the most valuable asset on the block. I will need to have our counsel review this, Dale said, placing the paper down. I cannot sign legal documents without review. You understand? Of course, I said. Take 24 hours. Fine, Dale said. He smiled again, that tight, shark-like smile. We will sort this out. We are all adults here. No need for hostility. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. I need to take this, he said, glancing at the screen. Business. He didn't leave the room. He just angled the phone away from me, tapping out a quick message with his thumbs. He looked serious, focused. I am glad we had this talk, Audrey, he said as he typed. Truly, it clears the air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look at it immediately. I waited until Dale finished typing and set his phone face down on the table. I should get back, I said, standing up. My clients get nervous when I am away from the console for too long. Go, Aunt Linda waved. We will see you Sunday for dinner? Please say yes. We have so much to catch up on. I will think about it, I said. I walked out of the room. I kept my head high. I waited until I was in the elevator, the doors sliding shut, blocking out their faces, before I pulled my phone out. I had a new notification. It was a screenshot. The sender was a number I didn't have saved, but I knew the source. There were only a few people in Dale's inner circle who had access to his private thoughts, and one of them had been invisible to him for years, just like me. The screenshot was of a text message thread. The timestamp was 1 minute ago. To Collins, legal. From Dale Kessler. She has the deed, but there has to be a workaround. Look into easement by necessity or community benefit clauses. That server farm is sitting on a utility access point for the main building. If we can prove her operation poses a risk to the grid or blocks our maintenance access, we might be able to force a judicial sale or absorb the land back into the trust for safety reasons. Do not reply to this on the official server. Personal email only. I stared at the screen. In the conference room, he was smiling and offering to eat the cost of the demolition. He was talking about family unity and pride, but under the table, literally and figuratively, he was already looking for the next weapon. He wasn't sorry he had tried to destroy me. He was just sorry he had used a bulldozer instead of a lawsuit. He wanted to find a loophole. He wanted to use the utility access as an excuse to claim my land was vital to his building. I put the phone back in my pocket. The elevator reached the lobby with a cheerful ding. Dale thought he was being clever. He thought he was playing four-dimensional chess, but he had made a critical error. He assumed that because I was in the technology business, I only looked at screens. He forgot that to build a fortress, you first have to survey the land. I had surveyed the land years ago, and I knew something about the utility access he was planning to use against me. I knew exactly where the lines were buried. And more importantly, I knew that for the last 30 years, the Kessler building had been routing its sewage overflow through a pipe that ran underneath my property, a pipe that was never on any city map, and certainly never approved by any easement. He wanted to talk about community benefit and safety risks. I walked out into the bright, hard sunlight of the afternoon. If Uncle Dale wanted to dig into the infrastructure, he was going to find a lot more than just cables. He was going to find the kind of dirt that doesn't wash off. Checkmate in 3 moves, I whispered to myself. I got into my car and drove back to the warehouse. It was time to pull the old blueprints out of the safe. The office of Mara Winslow was the exact opposite of the Kessler boardroom, where my uncle's domain was all mahogany, leather, and performative wealth. Mara's workspace was steel, glass, and frighteningly organized piles of paper. She was a real estate attorney who had made a reputation for shredding commercial developers who got too greedy, and she cost $600 an hour. I sat across from her, watching as she laid a large, high-resolution survey map of our city block onto her desk. She smoothed the edges with hands that looked strong enough to strangle a bear. "You are lucky, Audrey," Mara said. She didn't look up from the map. "You are incredibly, stupidly lucky." "I do not feel lucky," I said. "I feel like I just barely stopped a siege." "You stopped the first wave," Mara corrected. She looked me in the eye. "But you were reckless. You let them treat you like a squatter for 5 years. You let them build a narrative that you were absentee and negligent. In real estate law, silence is not golden. Silence is consent. They nearly took your property because you were too busy playing secret agent to file a cease and desist letter." I wanted to stay under the radar. I defended myself. "Well, you are on the radar now," Mara said. "You are a blip the size of a jumbo jet. So let us stop playing defense and look at the battlefield." She tapped a long, manicured fingernail on a strip of gray-shaded area on the map. It ran along the east side of my warehouse, connecting the main road to the large, paved service lot behind the Kessler building. "Tell me about this strip of land," Mara said. "That is the service alley," I explained. "The delivery trucks for the Kessler building use it. The waste management trucks use it. It is the only way to get large vehicles to their loading bays, because the front entrance is pedestrian only." "And who owns it?" Mara asked. "The trust," I said automatically. "It has been part of the common area for as long as I can remember. Everyone uses it." Mara smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile that made me very glad I was paying her and not fighting her. "Wrong," she said. She pulled a second document from her file. It was a copy of the original plat map from 1950, overlaid with the modern digital survey. When your grandmother split the parcel to give you the warehouse, Mara explained, tracing the line with a red pen. She did not just give you the building footprint, she gave you the land from curb to curb. The property line extends 15 feet past your eastern wall. I stared at the map. The red line cut right through the middle of the alleyway. Wait, I said, the implications starting to fire in my brain like a compiled script. Are you saying that the pavement they drive on is yours? Mara finished. About 60% of the width of that alley belongs to you. The Kessler building has a narrow 4-foot strip on their side, which is barely enough for a bicycle, let alone a garbage truck. For the last 30 years, every delivery, every trash pickup, every contractor van that has serviced your uncle's building has been driving on your dirt. I sat back in my chair. They do not know. Oh, they know, Mara said. Or at least, their lawyers suspect it. That is why your uncle sent me this love letter this morning. She slid a letter across the desk. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery, with the letterhead of the firm that represented the Kessler Trust. I read the opening paragraph. It was aggressive. It claimed that the shared access road was subject to a prescriptive easement due to continuous, open, and notorious use for a period exceeding 21 years. They are claiming adverse possession rights, Mara said, translating the legalese. Basically, they are saying, we have used this driveway for 30 years without asking. You never stopped us. So now it belongs to us by default. It is a common tactic. If they win, they get a permanent legal right to use your land for free, forever. And since they need that driveway to operate their building, they will fight hard for it. So they can just take it? I asked, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. Just because I let them use it? That is the catch, Mara said. Prescriptive easement requires the use to be hostile. That means they have to prove they used it without permission. If you gave them permission, then it is not hostile. It is just a neighbor being nice, and permission can be revoked at any time. I thought about grandmother Marlene. I thought about the boxes of papers she had left me. The meticulous records of a woman who didn't trust her son to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a commercial empire. My grandmother kept a tax diary, I said slowly. She recorded every penny she spent on the properties. That is good, Mara said, but we need more than receipts. We need proof that she knowingly allowed them to use that driveway, but retained ownership. I have something better, I said. I have the snow removal invoices. Mara raised an eyebrow. Go on. Every winter, I said, the memory surfacing clearly. Grandmother would complain that Dale never paid his share of plowing the alley. She would pay the plow guy for the whole strip. Then she would send Dale a bill for 50% of snow removal on private access lane, and she would write a note on it. Do you have copies of these notes? Mara asked, leaning forward. I have the carbon copies in the basement, I said. She kept everything. The note usually said something like, Dale, I am letting you use my driveway again this year, but you need to pay for the salt. Mara let out a laugh that sounded like a car door slamming. That is it. That is the silver bullet. I am letting you use my driveway. That establishes permission. It destroys the hostile claim. They do not have a prescriptive easement. Audrey, they have a revocable license, which means you can shut that road down whenever you want. If I shut it down, I said, calculating the logistics, delivery trucks cannot reach their loading dock. The restaurants in the Kessler building cannot get food. The garbage trucks cannot get to the dumpsters. Exactly, Mara said. You have your hand on their windpipe. She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. We are not going to shut them down. That would look petty to a judge. Instead, we are going to propose a formal deed of easement. She started writing rapidly. We will grant them the right to use the lane, but it will cost them. We will charge a yearly maintenance fee. We will charge a usage fee adjusted for inflation. And most importantly, we will add a termination clause. If they violate any of your property rights, say by trying to bulldoze your building again, the easement is voided immediately, and we put up a concrete wall. They will hate that, I said. They will sign it, Mara said calmly, because the alternative is carrying their garbage out through the front lobby. She looked at her watch. Now, on to the second piece of business. Jonah Sutter called me before you arrived. The mood in the room shifted. The triumph of the map discovery faded, replaced by something darker. Is there a problem with the warehouse? I asked. No, Mara said. The warehouse is fine. The problem is with the paperwork your uncle waved in your face yesterday. The demolition permit. He said it was expedited, I said. He lied, Mara said. But it is worse than a lie. Jonah took the file down to the records department. He pulled the permit number that was stamped on the blueprints. It didn't exist. I stared at her. What do you mean? I mean the number corresponded to a permit for a residential deck repair in the suburbs from 2012, Mara said. The stamp looked real. The signature looked real. It was signed by a T. Miller, but there is no T. Miller working in the zoning office. So the consultant? The consultant is a ghost, Mara said. Jonah did some digging. The firm that prepared the demolition plan, Apex Urban Solutions, is a shell company registered to a P.O. box 3 towns over, and the approval stamp was a Photoshop job. A good one, but a fake. Dale forged a city permit, I said, the reality of it sinking in. He didn't just bend the rules, he manufactured them. He likely hired a fixer, Mara said, someone who told him, "Don't worry, I will handle the city," and then just printed a fake document. But in the eyes of the law, Dale presented that document as valid to a city inspector. That is uttering a forged instrument. That is fraud against the municipality. Jonah said he was sending it to legal, I recalled. He did, Mara said. The city attorney has the file now. They are not happy. Cities hate it when developers make them look like fools. They are going to open a full investigation into every permit Dale has filed in the last 5 years. She leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. Your uncle wanted to play hardball, Audrey, but he brought a wiffle bat to a gunfight. This easement contract I'm about to write, it is going to be the only lifeline he has. He is going to need to show the city that he is cooperating with you, that he is a good neighbor, to keep them from throwing the book at him. So we squeeze him, I said. We squeeze him, Mara agreed. We draft the easement, we set the price high, and we include a clause that says the Kessler Trust acknowledges your full, undisputed ownership of the warehouse and the land, in perpetuity. If he signs it, he can never challenge your title again. And if he doesn't sign? Mara smirked. Then I called the city attorney and offered to provide them with a witness statement about the time Dale Kessler tried to use a fake permit to destroy evidence of a boundary dispute. I looked at the map again. The red line cutting through the alley didn't look like a property boundary anymore. It looked like a trap tightening. Write the contract, I said, but add one more thing. What? Mara asked. I want a clause regarding noise pollution, I said. My servers are sensitive to vibration. I want to restrict the hours that heavy trucks can use that alley. No deliveries between 10 at night and 6 in the morning. Mara paused. That will cripple the restaurants. They get their produce deliveries at 4 in the morning. I know, I said. Maybe Uncle Dale can negotiate that point. I want to see how much he is willing to pay for a few hours of quiet. Mara laughed again. I like this new you, Audrey. I really do. She picked up her phone. I will have the draft ready by tomorrow morning. Go find those snow removal receipts. And Audrey? Yes? Do not answer any calls from your family, she said. If they want to talk, they can talk to me, and I charge for every minute. I left Mara's office and walked out into the busy downtown street. I felt lighter than I had in years, for so long. I had been the victim, the one reacting to their moves, hiding in my shell. But now I had a map that proved they were standing on my ground. I had a lawyer who was sharper than a razor blade. And I had the knowledge that my uncle was sitting in his office right now, staring at a fake permit and wondering when the police were coming back. I walked to my car, but instead of driving straight to the warehouse, I took a detour. I drove past the back of the Kessler building. I saw a large food service truck idling in the alley, its wheels resting firmly on the pavement that belonged to me. The driver was unloading crates of lettuce. I slowed down. I didn't honk. I didn't yell. I just watched them use my land. "Enjoy it while it is free," I said to the empty car. I drove away, heading home to dig through grandmother's boxes. I had a feeling that the carbon copy of a snow removal invoice from 1998 was about to become the most expensive piece of paper in Fairmont Harbor. The phone call that changed the emotional landscape of the war came 2 hours after I left Mara Winslow's office. I was back in the warehouse, sitting in the blue-lit hum of the server aisles, sorting through a box of receipts from 1998, when my cell phone buzzed. The caller ID said Arthur Henderson, Esco. Arthur was my grandmother's personal attorney. He was 82 years old, a man who still wore three-piece suits and refused to use email because he believed it lacked gravitas. He had handled the transfer of the warehouse deed to me, and since then, we had only spoken on holidays. "Audrey," his voice crackled over the line, sounding like dry leaves being crushed. I received a notification from the city legal department regarding a permit dispute on the Kessler estate. It seems there was an incident. Uncle Dale tried to knock down the building. "Arthur," I said, my voice tired. "We stopped him. It is being handled." "I am not calling about the permit," Arthur said slowly. "I am calling because of the trigger condition." I sat up straighter in my ergonomic chair. "What trigger condition?" "When your grandmother Marlene passed," Arthur said, "she left a sealed envelope in my safe. It was marked with specific instructions. It was only to be opened and delivered to you in the event that the Kessler Trust, or any of its agents, attempted to legally challenge your ownership of the warehouse property." A chill that had nothing to do with the industrial air conditioning ran down my spine. "She left a letter?" I asked. "She left a contingency," Arthur corrected. "I have just had it couriered to your facility. The driver should be at your door in 5 minutes. Read it, Audrey, and then I suggest you go see your family. They need to hear this." 5 minutes later, a bike messenger handed me a thick, creamy envelope. It was heavy. The paper felt expensive, the kind Marlene used to write her thank you notes on. On the front, in her looping, elegant script, was written, "For Audrey, to be opened when the wolves come knocking." I took the envelope back to my desk. I sat in the middle of my digital fortress, surrounded by blinking lights and the drone of cooling fans, holding a piece of the past. I carefully used a letter opener to slice the seal. I unfolded the paper. The scent of lavender perfume, faint but unmistakable, drifted up. It hit me so hard my eyes instantly watered. It was the smell of her hugs. It was the smell of safety. I began to read. "My dearest Audrey, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your Uncle Dale has finally done what I always feared he would do. He has come for your sanctuary. I suspect he did not come asking nicely. I suspect he came with lawyers, or perhaps with heavy machinery, claiming that the family needs your land for the greater good. Dale always confuses his own ambition with the greater good. He has the Kessler eyes, but he lacks the Kessler heart. I gave you this warehouse not because I wanted you to store antiques, as I told the others. I gave it to you because I saw who you were becoming. I saw a brilliant, quiet girl who was drowning in a family that only values volume. I knew you needed a place where you could build your own world, away from their judgment, away from their constant need to polish and sell everything they touch. They will tell you that you owe them. They will tell you that family shares everything. Do not believe them. They do not want to share your success. Audrey, they want to consume it. They want to take the credit for the woman you made yourself into. I sat through 40 years of dinners listening to them dismiss you. I heard them call you strange. I heard them mock your interests. I held my tongue because I knew that one day you would prove them wrong without saying a word. I suspect that day is today. Do not let them win. Do not let them turn your hard work into another trophy on Dale's shelf. You are the true heir of my spirit, not because you run the business, but because you understand that integrity is worth more than a parking space. And just in case sentiment is not enough to stop them, I have included a copy of the secondary addendum to my will. It is the page Arthur kept separate from the main reading. I call it the bad behavior clause. Use it if you must. I am so proud of you. Love, Grandma. I put the letter down. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob that was trying to claw its way out of my throat. She knew. She had known everything. All those times I thought I was invisible. She had been watching. She had anticipated Dale's greed almost to the letter. She had even predicted the greater good argument. I wiped my eyes. I didn't have time to break down. Not yet. I looked at the second document in the envelope, the bad behavior clause. I read the legal text. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "Oh, Grandma," I whispered, a fierce smile touching my lips. "You were a genius." I stood up. I grabbed the letter and the addendum. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. I grabbed my car keys. 20 minutes later, I walked into the Kessler building. I didn't ask the receptionist for permission. I walked past the security desk, swiped my old access badge, which, surprisingly, still worked, and took the elevator to the penthouse floor. I knew they were there. It was Tuesday afternoon, the time for the weekly strategy meeting. I threw the double doors open. The room went silent. Dale, Aunt Linda, Lena, and 3 senior executives were huddled around the table. They looked up, startled. Dale looked particularly haggard. He had clearly spent the last 24 hours dealing with the city attorney. "Audrey," Dale said, standing up, "you cannot just barge in here. We are in a meeting." "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a texture they had never heard before. It was the voice of the person holding the gavel. "Excuse me?" Aunt Linda gasped. "Who do you think—" "I said sit down," I repeated, walking to the head of the table. I stood next to Dale. I didn't look at him. I looked at the empty chair where Grandmother Marlene used to sit. "I received a package from Arthur Henderson today," I said. Dale went still. He knew Arthur. He knew that Arthur only handled the deep, foundational family trust matters. "What kind of package?" Dale asked warily. "A letter from Mom," I said. "Marlene?" Aunt Linda's hand went to her throat. "But she has been gone for 5 years." "She wrote this for today," I said. "She wrote it specifically for the day you tried to take the warehouse." I placed the letter on the table, right in the center, on top of their spreadsheets and projections. "Read it," I said. Dale hesitated. He looked at the envelope, then at me. He reached out and picked it up. Aunt Linda leaned in, reading over his shoulder. I watched their faces. I saw the color drain from Aunt Linda's cheeks as she read the part about them mocking me. I saw Dale's jaw tighten as he read the part about his ambition. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of ghosts entering the room. When Dale finished, he didn't cry. He didn't look ashamed. He dropped the letter onto the table as if it were contaminated. "This is ridiculous," Dale said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "She was sick at the end. Her mind was wandering. You must have put these ideas in her head. You played the victim to get her sympathy." "She was not sick," I said. "She was sharp as a tack until the day she closed her eyes." "She says we mocked you," Aunt Linda said, her voice trembling, defensive tears forming in her eyes. "We never mocked you. We just worried about you. This is cruel. Audrey, bringing this up now, trying to guilt us with a dead woman's words." "I am not trying to guilt you," I said. "I am trying to show you that your narrative is false. You tell yourselves you are the protectors of this family, but she knew you were the predators." "She was manipulated," Dale shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You dizzied her with your little stories about how mean we were. You turned my own mother against me to secure a piece of real estate." "No," I said, meeting his gaze with absolute calm. "She just saw who you really are, Uncle Dale, and she knew that one day you would value a parking spot more than your own niece." Dale glared at me, his chest heaving. "Is that it? You came here to deliver a scolding from the grave? Fine. Message received. Now get out." "I am not done," I said. I pulled the second document from my folder, the addendum. The letter was the emotional warning, I said. This is the legal one. I slid the bad behavior clause toward him. What is this? Dale asked, not touching it this time. It is a conditional codicil to the original will, I explained. Grandmother knew you might try to fight me for the land, so she added a fail-safe, a poison pill. I pointed to paragraph 4. It says that the ownership of the Kessler building, this building we are standing in right now, is contingent upon the non-interference with the adjacent properties held by her direct female descendants. Dale froze. The executives around the table leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. If the Kessler Trust, or its executor, is found to have engaged in hostile legal action, physical destruction, or fraudulent maneuvering against the warehouse property, I recited from memory, then the voting shares of the Kessler Trust are immediately reorganized. Reorganized how? Lena whispered, looking terrified. It says that in the event of such hostility, I continued, the executor, that is you, Dale, is deemed to be acting against the interest of the estate, and his voting power is suspended for a period of 5 years, during which time control of the board reverts to a court-appointed trustee. The room went dead silent. That cannot be legal, Dale stammered. He was pale, sweating. She couldn't do that. I have been running this company for 20 years. She owned the company. Dale, I said. It was her money, her building, her rules, and she knew the only thing that would stop you from eating me alive was the threat of losing your own seat at the table. I picked up the document and tapped it against my palm. You committed fraud yesterday with that fake permit, I said softly. You engaged in physical destruction. You fulfilled every single condition of this clause. All I have to do is hand this document to Arthur Henderson, and he files it with the probate court. By tomorrow morning, you will be escorted out of this building by security. Dale collapsed into his chair. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The power, the arrogance, the bluster, it was all gone. He wasn't the titan of industry anymore. He was just a son who had disappointed his mother, and now he was paying the price. Aunt Linda was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. Lena was staring at me as if I were an alien creature who had just revealed sharp teeth. You wouldn't, Dale whispered. Audrey, this is the family legacy. If you bring in a trustee, strangers will run the business, stocks will drop. We could lose everything. I know, I said. That is why Grandma Marlene left it up to me. She gave me the choice. She put the power in my hands, Dale, because she trusted me to know when to pull the trigger. I looked at him, truly looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. And I realized I didn't need to fire the gun to win. The fact that I was holding it was enough. She prepared for this day a long time ago, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. And now, Uncle Dale, we are going to negotiate, and this time, you are going to listen to every single word I say. I sat down at the opposite end of the table. Let's talk about the easement, I said, and let's talk about the rent you are going to pay for the last 30 years of using my driveway. Dale didn't argue. He didn't bluster. He just nodded, defeated, realizing that the abandoned warehouse had just cast a shadow that covered his entire world. The document hit the table with a sound heavier than its page count would suggest. It was a standard deed of easement, drafted by Mara Winslow. But to the people sitting around the mahogany table, it might as well have been a declaration of war. This is extortion, Uncle Dale said. He was reading page 3, his face flushing a deep, unhealthy red. $75,000 a year? For an alleyway? Audrey, this is robbery. We could rent a penthouse in Manhattan for this price. It is not just an alleyway, I said calmly, clasping my hands on top of the file. It is a critical logistics corridor that your building has been utilizing illegally for 3 decades. You are not paying for pavement. Uncle Dale, you are paying for the convenience of not having to haul your garbage through the front lobby of a Class A office building. You are paying for the privilege of keeping your Michelin star restaurant tenants happy. We are family, Aunt Linda pleaded. her voice trembling. She looked small in her chair. The earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Family does not charge family rent. We help each other. We support each other. Family does not hire bulldozers to destroy each other's livelihoods at 7 in the morning, I countered. And family does not forge municipal permits to bypass safety regulations. Blood is a biological fact. Linda, it is not a legal defense, and right now, Blood is not going to sign this contract. You are. I tapped the paper. Clause 4. Automatic adjustment for inflation based on the Consumer Price Index, calculated annually. Clause 5. Immediate termination of the easement if any agent of the Kessler Trust interferes with the operations of Northbridge Compute Cooperative, physically or legally. That means no more fake permits, no more surprise inspections, no more bulldozers. Dale threw the pen down. I cannot sign this. The board will revolt. The shareholders will ask why our operating expenses just jumped by nearly $100,000. Tell them it is the cost of doing business, I said. Or tell them the truth. Tell them you nearly lost the entire building because you tried to steal land from a woman you underestimated. Tell them that Inspector Jonah Sutter is currently drafting a report for the city attorney regarding the fraudulent demolition order you presented yesterday. Tell them that if I pick up my phone and call Jonah to tell him you are refusing to cooperate, the city will not just fine you, they will freeze every active permit you have across the district. Dale flinched at Jonah's name. He knew the inspector was not bluffing. The threat of a fraud investigation was a guillotine blade hanging over his neck, and I was the only one holding the rope. Fine, Dale hissed. Fine, we will pay the rent, but if we are paying, we are partners. I want full transparency. He leaned forward, trying to regain a shred of authority. If Northbridge is operating next to our asset, and if we are effectively subsidizing your access, I want to know what is going on in there. I want a client list. I want to know who is storing data on those servers. I need to know if you are hosting anything unsavory. We have a reputation to uphold. It was a desperate pivot. He was trying to turn the transaction into an information grab. He wanted to know the value of what he had almost destroyed. He wanted to see if there were any clients he could poach, or any leverage he could use later. Absolutely not, I said. It is a reasonable request, Dale argued. Due diligence. We are neighbors. It is a violation of federal privacy laws and my non-disclosure agreements, I said. My clients pay me for security. Uncle Dale, that includes security from you. You do not get a look at the books just because you are renting the driveway. I paused, letting my gaze drift over to my cousin Ethan. He was sitting at the far end of the table, scrolling on his phone, acting bored. He had been quiet throughout the entire meeting, playing the part of the neutral observer. Besides, I continued, keeping my eyes on Ethan, you have already proven that you cannot be trusted with operational details. You almost caused a catastrophic data loss event yesterday. If that power had been cut, Uncle Dale, it would not have just been my business that suffered. One of my clients is a regional healthcare provider. If their patient database had gone offline during a surgery, people could have died. You were not just knocking down a shed. You were swinging a wrecking ball in a crowded room. We didn't know, Ethan spoke up suddenly, looking up from his phone. Stop acting like we are terrorists. Audrey, it was a mistake. We thought it was empty. Did you? I asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet. I unlocked it and placed it in the center of the table, facing Dale. I did a little data recovery this morning, I said. Since you like to talk about transparency. On the screen was a blown-up image of a text message exchange. What is this? Dale squinted at the screen. It is a text thread from the foreman of the demolition crew, I said. I asked him to forward it to me before he left the site yesterday. He was very cooperative once he realized he was about to be charged with criminal negligence. I pointed to the sender's number. Do you recognize that number, Uncle Dale? Dale looked. He frowned. Then he looked down the table at Ethan. Ethan? Dale asked. That is your number? Ethan went pale. He tried to lock his phone screen and slide it into his pocket, but the movement was jerky, guilty. Read the message sent at 6:45 yesterday morning, I said. Dale read it aloud. Don't wait for the city guy. Just start the engine. Once the roof is caved in, they can't stop us. Do it before the bitch wakes up. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. The bitch, I repeated, my voice ice cold. I assume that is me? I swiped the screen to the next image. And here's another one from last week, sent to the graphic designer who forged the permit stamp. Make it look real enough to fool a drive-by. My uncle won't check the details. He just wants it done. Dale stared at the screen. His face went through a complex series of contortions, shock, realization, and then a fury that was finally directed at the right target. You, Dale whispered, looking at Ethan. You told me the permit was legit. You told me you handled it personally. I was trying to help, Ethan stammered, standing up. You said you wanted the parking lot. You said Audrey was holding us back. I just took initiative. You committed fraud in my name, Dale roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the water pitcher jumped. You set me up. I walked out there and handed a fake document to a city inspector because of you. We needed the land, Ethan shouted back, his mask of neutrality shattering. I have debts, okay? Real debts. The parking revenue was going to cover my margin calls. I needed that project to clear by the end of the month. Audrey was sitting on a gold mine and doing nothing with it. It was wasted space. It was my space, I said. It was a rust bucket, Ethan spat at me. You are just a selfish little nerd playing with computers while the rest of us try to keep this family afloat. You deserve to lose it. Ethan, Aunt Linda shrieked. Sit down. Stop talking. No, let him talk, I said. I want to hear it. I want to hear exactly how much my family values me. But the family was already fracturing. The united front was gone. Dale was looking at Ethan with hatred, realizing that his own nephew had almost sent him to prison. Aunt Linda was looking at Dale, realizing her brother had lost control of the ship, and Lena was looking at the door, calculating her exit strategy. You are fired, Dale said to Ethan. His voice was shaking. Get out of this building. You are off the trust board. You are done. You cannot fire me, Ethan sneered. I know where the bodies are buried. Uncle Dale, I know about the zoning bribes from 2010. And now I know about them too, I interjected. Thank you for the update, Ethan. Ethan froze. He realized he had just handed me more ammunition. Get out, Dale repeated, quieter this time, but with more finality. Ethan looked around the room. He saw no allies. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the heavy double doors behind him. The vibration rattled the frame. We sat in the wake of his exit. The energy in the room had changed. It was no longer a negotiation between a powerful family and a weak niece. It was a room full of broken people, and I was the only one holding the glue. He was desperate, Aunt Linda whispered, wiping her eyes. He didn't mean it. He meant every word, I said. He just didn't expect to get caught. I pushed the easement contract toward Dale again. Sign it, I said. Now, before I decide to forward those text messages to the city attorney as an addendum to Jonah's report. If I do that, Ethan goes to jail, and you go down as an accessory. Dale didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate for client lists. He didn't mention the greater good. He picked up his gold fountain pen, the one grandfather had given him, and unscrewed the cap. His hand was shaking slightly as he signed his name on the bottom line. Dale Kessler, executor. He pushed the paper back to me. Are we done? He asked. He sounded 10 years older than he had that morning. We are done with the easement, I said. I signed my name next to his. Audrey Kerr, proprietor. I capped my pen and put the contract into my bag. I stood up. But Uncle Dale, I said, looking down at him, do not think for a second that this returns us to the status quo. You tried to break me. You failed. And in the process, you showed me exactly where all the cracks in this family are. I looked at the empty chair where Ethan had sat. I looked at the tears on Linda's face. Grandmother Marlene left me that letter because she hoped I would be the shield for this family, I said. But after today, I realized I cannot be your shield. I have to be my own. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the brass handle. The rent is due on the 1st of the month, I said. Do not be late. My accounting software automatically adds a 5% late fee after 24 hours. I walked out. The hallway was quiet. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and watched the numbers count down. I had won. I had the land. I had the income. I had the legal protection. But as I walked out of the Kessler building and into the cool evening air, I knew the war wasn't over. Ethan was out there, desperate and vengeful. Dale was wounded and humiliated, and I was no longer the invisible girl in the hoodie. I was the target. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Marcus at the warehouse. Upgrade the perimeter security to level 4 and change the access codes. Everything. I looked back at the skyscraper looming over my small, rusted fortress. This is just the beginning, I whispered. I got into my car. The engine started with a roar. I didn't drive home. I drove back to the warehouse. I had work to do. And for the first time, I wasn't just building a business. I was building an empire. The easement contract was supposed to be the end of the hostilities, but in reality, it was just the opening bell for the main event. In the 48 hours following the signing, the dynamic of our street shifted with the violence of a tectonic plate snapping into a new position. The city did not just file a report, they declared war. Inspector Jonas Sutter had returned to his office with the forged permit and the text messages I had extracted from the foreman. By Wednesday morning, a fleet of municipal vehicles had descended on the Kessler building like white blood cells attacking an infection. They weren't just looking at the warehouse anymore. They were looking at everything. I sat in my office, watching the feeds from my external security cameras. I saw inspectors from the electrical board, the fire department, and the zoning commission entering my uncle's lobby. They carried thick binders and wore expressions of grim determination. The fallout was immediate and visible. By Thursday afternoon, I saw the first moving truck. It belonged to the high-end architectural firm that leased the entire 3rd floor of the Kessler building. They were breaking their lease. Word had gotten out that the building was under investigation for systemic safety fraud, and in the corporate world, reputation is a contagion. If you stay in a tainted building, you become a tainted business. I watched a workman scrape the gold lettering of the firm's name off the glass doors. It was a small act of erasure, but to Uncle Dale, it must have felt like an amputation. My phone rang. It was Mara Winslow. "Audrey," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Jonas Sutter just called me. He wants to do a final site walkthrough of your facility. He is bringing a specialist from the district attorney's office. He asked if you could open the secure area." "Room 4B?" I asked. "Yes," Mara said. "He says it is necessary to establish the full extent of the potential damages. He needs to know exactly what was at risk." "Tell him to be here in 30 minutes, I said. "And Mara, you should come too." When they arrived, the atmosphere was different. There was no bluster, no shouting. Jonah looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. Next to him was a woman introduced as Assistant District Attorney Reynolds, a sharp-featured woman who looked at my warehouse not as a building, but as a piece of evidence in a much larger puzzle. I led them through the main server floor. The hum of the fans was the only sound. The technicians kept their heads down, sensing the gravity of the visitors. We reached the back of the facility. We stood before the heavy steel door of room 4B. There was no handle, only the biometric scanner glowing a soft, warning red. "This is the room my uncle wanted to bulldoze," I said. "And what exactly is inside?" Reynolds asked, her pen poised over a notebook. "Your uncle claims it is just a server closet. He is trying to argue that the potential damages were exaggerated." "He is wrong," I said. I stepped up to the scanner. I placed my hand on the panel and leaned in for the retinal scan. The machine chirped. A complex series of mechanical latches disengaged, and the heavy door swung open on silent, oiled hinges. We stepped inside. The room was colder than the rest of the warehouse. It was kept at a constant 62 degrees. It was small, soundproofed, and completely isolated from the outside world. There were no windows. The walls were lined with copper mesh to create a Faraday cage, blocking all incoming and outgoing wireless signals. In the center of the room stood a single, massive server rack, encased in bulletproof glass. "This is not a standard data host," I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the small space. "This is a digital evidence vault. I operate this room under a specific contract with a consortium of forensic accountants and private investigators." Reynolds stepped closer, looking at the black boxes behind the glass. "What do they store here?" she asked. "Chain of custody data," I said. "When a corporation is being investigated for embezzlement, or when a law firm is handling a high-stakes divorce involving hidden assets, they cannot just leave the data on a laptop. It needs to be mirrored, encrypted, and stored in a facility that guarantees zero tampering. That is what this room is. It is a digital Switzerland." I turned to Jonah. "If Uncle Dale's excavator had breached this wall," I said, pointing to the reinforced concrete, "he would not just have broken some computers. He would have corrupted the primary evidence for 3 ongoing federal fraud cases and a class action lawsuit involving a pharmaceutical company. The liability wouldn't have been in the millions. Inspector, it would have been in the billions." Jonah let out a low whistle. He looked at the wall, imagining the yellow bucket of the machine tearing through it. "He was playing with a nuclear bomb," Jonah whispered, "and he thought it was a piñata." "Does he know?" Reynolds asked. "Does Mr. Kessler know what is in here?" "No," I said. "He never asked. He just assumed it was junk." Reynolds closed her notebook. "That makes the negligence charge stick. Reckless disregard for the consequences of his actions. But there is something else." She looked at Jonah. Jonah nodded and pulled a file from his briefcase. "Audrey," Jonah said, his tone shifting from professional to personal. "While we were digging into the forged permit, we found something, the stamp on the paperwork, the fake signature from T. Miller. We traced the graphic file." "Mara said it was a shell company," I said. "Apex Urban Solutions." "It is," Jonah agreed. "But we found out who pays the rent for their P.O. box. It is not your cousin Ethan. Ethan might have sent the text messages, and he might have pushed for the demolition. But he didn't set up the infrastructure for the fraud. He is too young and too stupid." Jonah laid a document on a small table. It was a bank record from 5 years ago. "Apex Urban Solutions received a startup capital transfer from an account linked to the West Side Revitalization Project," Jonah said. I froze. The West Side Revitalization Project was my uncle's crowning achievement. It was the deal that had made him the king of local real estate. He had converted an old block of row houses into luxury condos and a massive parking garage. "That project had a lot of problems," Jonah said. "Delays with permits, inspections that vanished, opposition from historical societies that suddenly went silent. We always suspected someone was greasing the wheels, but we could never prove it." "Until now," Reynolds interjected. "The forged stamp Dale used on your warehouse? It matches the exact same digital signature artifact found on 3 expedited permits for the West Side garage. The same flaw in the Photoshop layer." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He has done this before," I said. "He has been doing it for a decade," Jonah said grimly. "Your uncle didn't just forge a permit to get rid of you. He used an existing tool in his toolkit. He has a system. Audrey, whenever a regulation gets in his way, he manufactures a bypass. Apex Urban Solutions isn't just a shell company. It is his personal forgery department." "This changes everything," Mara said, her voice hushed. "This is not just a code violation anymore. This is racketeering. This is a RICO case." "Exactly," Reynolds said. "We are not just looking at a fine. We are looking at prison time. Significant prison time. The only reason we haven't moved yet is that we are connecting the final financial dots between Apex and Dale's personal accounts." My mind was reeling. I had always known Dale was greedy. I had known he was a bully, but I had never thought he was a criminal mastermind. I thought he was just a man who cut corners, not a man who built an entire fake road to drive around them. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," Reynolds said, looking me dead in the eye, "when the news breaks, the Kessler Trust is going to freeze, assets will be seized, accounts will be locked, your warehouse is legally separate, thanks to your grandmother, but everything else, the main building, the family accounts, the maintenance funds, it is all going to be paralyzed." "We wanted you to know," Jonah added, "so you can protect yourself, because when a man like Dale realizes the walls are closing in, he gets dangerous." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. I looked down. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Answer it," Reynolds said. "Put it on speaker." I tapped the screen. "Hello?" "Audrey." It was a man's voice, smooth, polished, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "This is Franklin Pames. I represent a private investment group associated with the Kessler Trust." "I know who you are," I said. Pames was Dale's fixer lawyer, the one who handled the deals that didn't go on the main books. "Good," Pames said. "Then let us cut to the chase. We are aware of the administrative difficulties your uncle is facing. We are looking to simplify the portfolio. We are prepared to offer you a buyout for parcel 402B. "I am not selling," I said instantly. "Listen to the number before you say no," Pam said. $3 million, cash, wired to an offshore account of your choice by close of business today. All you have to do is sign a transfer of deed and a non-disclosure agreement stating that any previous disputes regarding the property were result of clerical errors." I looked at Jonah. He shook his head slightly. They were trying to buy my silence. They wanted me to sign a paper saying the attempted demolition was just a paperwork mix-up, effectively killing the fraud investigation before it could turn into a criminal indictment. If I sold, the victim disappeared, and without a victim, the case got a lot harder to prosecute. $3 million, I repeated. "That is a lot of money for a rust bucket." "It is a fair market value for peace of mind," Pames said. "Think about it. Audrey, you can walk away, you can start fresh, or you can stay here and watch your family name be dragged through the mud. Do you really want to be the one holding the match while the house burns down?" I looked at the server rack in the glass case. I looked at the letter from Grandmother Marlene that I kept in my bag. She hadn't left me this warehouse to get rich. She had left it to me to break the cycle. "Mr. Pames," I said, my voice steady, "you can tell my uncle something for me." "What is that?" "Tell him that integrity is not for sale," I said. "And tell him that I am not holding the match. I am just the one who called the fire department." I hung up. Reynolds nodded, a look of respect on her face. "Smart move. If you had taken that money, you would have been an accessory to obstruction of justice." "I know," I said. We walked back out of the secure room. The air in the main warehouse felt warmer now, but I felt cold. Jonah stopped at the main entrance. The sun was setting outside, casting long, bloody shadows across the pavement of the alley that I now officially controlled, and which my family had used as a crime corridor for years. "You should go home tonight, Audrey," Jonah said quietly, his hand on the door frame. "Lock your doors. Do not answer the door for anyone but the police." "Why?" I asked. Jonah looked toward the Kessler building, looming dark and silent against the twilight sky. "Because the warrant has been signed," Jonah said. "At 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, we are arresting Dale Kessler, and we are arresting your cousin Ethan. It is going to be a raid. SWAT support. The works." He looked back at me. "Prepare yourself," he said. "Tomorrow, there will be people in handcuffs, and once that happens, there is no going back. The family is over." "The family was over a long time ago," I said. "Tomorrow is just the funeral." Jonah nodded and walked out into the night. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty street, listening to the hum of the servers behind me. They were processing data, backing up truth, archiving reality. I turned around and locked the door. I set the alarm. I checked the cameras one last time. The board was set, the pieces were moving, and the king was about to fall. The municipal hearing room at City Hall was a stark contrast to the plush, velvet-lined interiors of the Kessler building. Here, the floors were linoleum, the chairs were hard plastic, and the lighting was a merciless fluorescent buzz that highlighted every bead of sweat on my Uncle Dale's forehead. It was 10 in the morning on a Friday. The hearing had been convened by the City Zoning Commission in conjunction with the City Attorney's Office to address irregularities in the demolition application for Parcel 402B. On one side of the room sat the Kessler faction, Uncle Dale, looking diminished in a gray suit, Aunt Linda, who kept checking her watch as if this were merely a boring social engagement she could leave, and Cousin Ethan, who was aggressively tapping his foot, unable to look anyone in the eye. On the other side sat me, flanked by my attorney Mara Winslow and Inspector Jonah Sutter. The presiding officer, a stern woman named Commissioner Vance, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the file. "Mr. Kessler," Vance said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "We have reviewed the timeline. You attempted to execute a demolition order on a structure that not only housed an active, licensed business, but also contained sensitive digital infrastructure. You did this based on a permit that our records show was never issued by this city. Do you have an explanation?" Dale stood up. He adjusted his tie, trying to summon the ghost of his usual boardroom charisma. "Commissioner," Dale began, his voice smooth but thin, "I believe we are losing sight of the bigger picture here. My intention was purely civic improvement. That warehouse is a relic. It is ugly. It brings down property values. I was trying to create parking, something this city desperately needs. I admit, there may have been some clerical errors regarding the paperwork, but my motivation was the greater good. I was trying to clean up a mess that my niece," he gestured vaguely at me, "refused to address." He looked at me with a mix of pity and accusation. I was trying to help her. I was trying to turn a non-performing asset into something that benefits the community. It was a good performance. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch dealing with a stubborn child. "Civic improvement does not justify forgery, Mr. Kessler," Commissioner Vance said dryly, "nor does it justify endangering the public welfare." "It was a misunderstanding," Dale insisted, his voice rising. "I relied on consultants. If they cut corners, that is on them. But surely, we can resolve this with a fine? The Kessler Trust is a pillar of this city. We employ hundreds of people." This was the moment. He was leaning on his status. He was betting that the city wouldn't dare touch the Kessler money. I looked at Mara. She gave me a small nod. I stood up. I held a thin blue folder in my hand. It wasn't the thick stack of evidence Jonah had brought. It was just 3 pages. "Commissioner Vance," I said, "if I may." "Go ahead, Ms. Kerr," Vance said. "My uncle speaks about the Kessler Trust as if he is the absolute authority over it," I said, walking to the podium. "He claims he was acting on behalf of the estate, but I have here a document that disputes his standing to make that claim." I opened the folder. "This is the conditional codicil to the last will and testament of Marlene Kessler," I said. "It was filed with the probate court 5 years ago, but it contains a dormant clause that is triggered only under specific circumstances." Dale scoffed loudly. "We went over this in the office. Audrey, you cannot strip my voting rights just because you are angry." "I am not stripping them," I said, looking at him calmly. "You stripped them yourself." I turned to the commissioner. Paragraph 4. Section B states, "If the executor of the trust utilizes trust funds or resources to engage in fraudulent legal action against any beneficiary, specifically regarding the inheritance of real property, the executor shall be deemed in breach of fiduciary duty. Upon proof of such fraud, the executor's authority is immediately suspended, and the trust is placed under the temporary conservatorship of the court to prevent further dissipation of assets." I handed the document to the commissioner. "The definition of fraud in the will includes the falsification of municipal documents," I added. The room went silent. Dale stared at me. He hadn't read the fine print. He had dismissed my threat in the boardroom as a bluff. thinking I wouldn't actually go to the city. He didn't realize that by dragging him here, I wasn't just defending my warehouse, I was activating the trap door he was standing on. Commissioner, I continued, my uncle just admitted on the record that there were clerical errors with the permit, but we have evidence that these were not errors. They were deliberate fabrications paid for by the trust. I stepped back, and Jonah Sutter stepped forward. Commissioner, Jonah said, placing a flash drive and a stack of printed screenshots on the bench. We have traced the source of the forged permit. It was created by a shell entity called Apex Urban Solutions. Dale looked confused. I told you, I hired a consultant. You did, Jonah said. But here's the interesting part. We subpoenaed the bank records for Apex Urban Solutions yesterday. The startup capital for that shell company didn't come from the trust's general fund. It came from a personal discretionary account. Jonah turned and pointed a finger directly at the Kessler table, but he wasn't pointing at Dale. He was pointing at Ethan. The account belongs to Ethan Kessler, Jonah said. The air left the room. Dale whipped his head around to stare at his nephew. Ethan shrank down in his chair, his face turning the color of old paper. We also recovered the email chain between Ethan Kessler and the graphic designer who made the fake stamp, Jonah continued, relentless. Ethan explicitly instructed the designer to copy the style of the West Side permit and to make it look good enough for Dale to sign without looking. Jonah looked at Dale. Your nephew set you up, Mr. Kessler. He created the fraud. But you signed it. You presented it. And under the law, and under the terms of your mother's will, that makes you liable. Dale looked at Ethan. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. He realized in that second that he hadn't been the mastermind. He had been the vehicle. Ethan had used Dale's arrogance and greed to push a project that would cover his own debts, knowing that if it went wrong, Dale's signature was the one on the paper. You, Dale whispered, his voice shaking. You told me it was handled. You let me walk into a felony. I needed the money, Ethan shouted, cracking under the pressure. The margin calls were killing me. You wouldn't give me an advance. I had to get the parking revenue flowing. Order! Commissioner Vance banged her gavel. Order in this hearing. But the damage was done. The Kessler front had collapsed completely. Commissioner Vance looked at the documents. She looked at the will. She looked at the pathetic scene of the family turning on itself. Based on the evidence presented, Vance said, her voice cutting through the noise, and in accordance with the codicil of the Marlene Kessler estate, this commission recognizes that a breach of fiduciary duty has occurred. We are referring this matter to the probate court immediately for the appointment of a trustee. Mr. Kessler, you are hereby stripped of your authority to represent the Kessler Trust in any municipal matters pending a full investigation. Dale slumped back in his chair. It wasn't just a defeat. It was an erasure. He had lost his power. He had lost his reputation. And he had lost it because he tried to crush the one person who actually had the integrity he pretended to possess. Two police officers who had been standing at the back of the room moved forward. They didn't handcuff anyone yet, but they stood on either side of Ethan, guiding him up. Ethan Kessler, one officer said, we have a warrant for your questioning regarding fraud and forgery. As they led Ethan out, passing right by me, he didn't look at me, he just looked at the floor. The hearing was adjourned. The room began to empty. Dale remained in his chair, staring at the blank wall. He looked like a man who had woken up in a house that no longer belonged to him. I walked over to the table. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just packed my files into my bag. Uncle Dale, I said. He looked up. His eyes were watery, red-rimmed. He looked old. I just wanted a parking lot, he whispered. It was just a piece of asphalt. Why did you have to take it this far? I didn't take it this far, I said. You did. You brought the bulldozer. You brought the lies. I just brought the truth. I leaned in closer, my voice low but steady. You wanted to break my warehouse to make space for cars, I said. But you didn't realize that the foundation of that warehouse was the only thing holding up your chair. You broke your own seat, Uncle Dale, just to try and steal mine. He flinched. He knew it was true. He had sacrificed his control of the family empire for a few $1,000s of parking revenue. The easement is still valid, I said, standing up straight. The rent is due on the 1st. The new trustee will handle the payments. I expect they will be on time. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the hearing room, past Aunt Linda, who was sobbing into a handkerchief, past the confused legal team that was trying to salvage what was left of their billable hours. I walked out of the heavy double doors of City Hall and stepped into the midday sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a notification from Northbridge Compute Cooperative. A new contract had just been signed. A major data analytics firm wanted to lease the remaining server capacity in the warehouse. The value of the contract was enough to pay for a complete renovation of the exterior. Maybe I would finally paint over the rust, or maybe I would keep it, as a reminder. I looked across the street. I could see the Kessler building in the distance, tall and imposing, but it didn't look scary anymore. It just looked like a building. The parking lot they had dreamed of, the flat expanse of asphalt they had been willing to destroy a family for, was gone. It would remain a drawing on a piece of paper, buried in an evidence box in the basement of the police station. My warehouse stood, my business stood, and I stood. I put my phone away and started walking down the steps, my heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the stone. The abandoned warehouse wasn't abandoned anymore. It was the strongest fortress in the city. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and high-tech revenge. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from right now. I really enjoy connecting with you all. And if you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.